Okay, so welcome back to another edition of our joint podcast, all around the COVID crisis and how we're coping. This is a joint podcast between myself and Dr. Caroline Walker. Caroline, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi Rachel. It's great to be back with you. My name is Dr. Caroline Walker. I'm an NHS-based psychiatrist and therapist, and I specialise in the well-being of doctors. I founded an organisation called The Joyful Doctor, which is all about supporting the well-being of doctors, and I run the Joyful Doctor podcast.
Great. And I'm Dr. Rachel Morris. I'm a GP turned executive coach. I specialise in resilience and productivity in the workplace for professionals in high stress jobs. And I run a training course called the Shapes Toolkit. And I'm also host of the You Are Not a Frog podcast. So it's good to be back today. It's been I think a couple of weeks since we recorded the last one. And I think things are constantly sort of changing through the COVID crisis, and we've been talking with teams and managers and doctors and individuals, and have sort of noticed the way things are shifting a little bit. Caroline, what have you noticed going on with people?
Yeah, absolutely. I've noticed that with the last sort of couple of weeks particularly, we've been really shifting into a slightly more exhausted phase. It's like we had that first sort of rush of those first few weeks where everyone was pulling together, there was lots of energy, we all got the same goal in mind. Really almost quite exciting, but also quite scary. And now it feels like that initial kind of phase is sort of starting to wear off a bit, and we're kind of shifting towards this new phase. It's sort of almost like a recovery phase that starts with a period of feeling just a bit flat and a bit exhausted and a bit like, oh my goodness, this is going on quite a long time now and there's no end in sight. So I really feel like we're at that point at the moment, and we're there's a name, I think we're talking about it within healthcare, as COVID fatigue. It's like we've kind of a bit fed up, we've had enough, we've just not got that energy that we had just a few weeks ago. So,
yeah. And so we were just talking earlier that we think there are a few factors contributing to this, and you've already outlined some. And I think it's very different for lots of different people, because I think we're all doing such different things, aren't we? Some of us, absolutely, working as hard as we possibly can on the front line, seeing patients all the time. Some of us are on the front line, but our work is really quite quiet because no one's coming in. Some of us are now seeing our work starting to creep up, and I think especially GPs, they might not be seeing patients face to face so much, but actually the phones are going crazy, and they having just so many phone calls now from people worried about other medical conditions and things like that. And then we've got people at home who are having to isolate, who also are working incredibly hard and having to cope with the kids as well. And then there are some people who have been furloughed and actually maybe don't have as much to do. So it's difficult, isn't it, when you're trying to interact with friends and colleagues who are at a very different stage and doing very different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of those different places are quite, people are having the normal reactions that they would have in those different times. So those that are still in it and still feeling quite stressed and maybe a bit overwhelmed, those who are sitting somewhere perhaps with less to do, feeling quite guilty or quite anxious about what's to come, those where it's starting to creep up, thinking, oh my goodness, how hard is this going to get, and how are we going to cope, how are we going to readjust to this new normal that everyone keeps talking about. And I think you're right that everyone's at different points at different stages right now, and that can be quite challenging when you're perhaps feeling one way and that friend you're talking to or that colleague you're talking to is feeling another way, but everything that we're feeling is still quite normal, I think, at this stage, for all those different bits of the process. We were talking earlier, weren't we, about the different phases when something like this happens. There's an initial phase, then there's a sort of recovery phase, and then there's a sort of rebuilding phase. And I know you've been speaking with people this week about that and how.
Yeah, I was having a really interesting chat with someone who works for charities, and there's sort of quite well recognised crisis sort of response thing where, if something happens like an earthquake, a big disaster, you've got your initial response, high adrenaline, you're going at it, you're rescuing people, you're sorting things out, and everything's go. And then after that, you've got the recovery phase where the disaster is over, then you get to recover. Now, obviously, this is like you have this one-off thing going on, but I guess there are other disasters that are ongoing, aren't there? And I guess with the COVID, it is a bit ongoing.
Absolutely. So it's not like an earthquake or a terrorist attack or something like that, where it happens at point, on day one, and then you follow this pattern. Actually, what we're having is lots of little repeating traumas and little almost like aftershocks, and we may have more traumas to come, and that's a really tricky place. So what I'm seeing interestingly this week is I've spoken to a few doctors who are almost starting to feel that stress and anxiety again that they felt in the first week or two, because for them it's like, oh, we're about to face this challenge again. So say GPs where patients are coming back in and they're that little bit busier, and they're now starting to think, oh, how are we going to manage these patients who've got chronic symptoms, or how are we going to get the care to people who need it in the new ways that we're working at the moment. And there's almost, and for a lot with testing happening more as well, I think that's leaving a lot of people in surprising situations. So people finding out that they're asymptomatically positive, or finding out that they're negative when they really thought they would be positive. And so people are kind of, it's a really strange time right now where we've kind of got one foot in that crisis phase still, and one foot in this recovery phase where it's like this is changing and shifting, and we're kind of starting to work out how we're going to be living and adjusting, but it's still also happening, it's still unfolding, and so we're getting a real mix of emotions at the moment, I think.
I guess the third phase of that is then the rebuilding phase, where we start to rebuild things, and I guess what I've observed is that we're doctors and professionals in high stress jobs, we're very quick to get into action on things. And I think there's a risk that we go straight from the response phase into the rebuilding phase without stopping to recover and to look after ourselves and think, actually, what is it that we need, just as individuals, but also as teams and as a system as a whole, to recover.
Absolutely spot on, Rachel. Like we often rush that part, and I see that in doctors all the time with their mental health generally, and with the physical health. Actually, we've all done it, haven't we? We've got a flu, and then the moment we can get out of bed or have a meal, we're like, right, when are we going back to work? We're right back on it, and we've really struggled to go, oh, actually, when you've had a proper flu, sometimes it takes a month or 6 weeks to kind of really feel better. And with COVID, I think it's going to be several months for us to recover from what's just happened in the last couple of months. And there may be other peaks and stresses along the way, which will kind of push that back as well. So you're absolutely right. We need to be giving ourselves enough time and enough support and enough space right now to just kind of feel and talk and share and process what's just happened and what is happening to us as human beings, because it's big stuff.
It sort of reminds me a bit like the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, where you start with this and then you go into this and then you go into this and then you go into this, but actually we know that it doesn't happen in a linear way. You start with that, you go to that, and then you might circle back again and go through it all again. And I guess that's what's going to happen, isn't it, with this?
Absolutely. And it's going to go on for months. So we might get days or weeks where we're feeling a bit better, but then we'll get a day where suddenly we're really angry again, or suddenly we're really tearful and upset again. We might get stretches of periods, or like a couple of weeks or longer, where we're feeling a bit flat and a bit down, and it can feel like you're quite depressed. And I'm seeing a lot of people who are thinking, oh, is this wrong? Am I depressed, or have I got PTSD, or have I got this or that? And I think at the moment we're still in that phase where it's kind of, most things are kind of probably quite normal, and it's just our normal human response to trauma and grief and adjusting when such big things happen. So if you're still getting kind of fuzzy headedness, you can't remember what day it is, a lot of us are still getting that, where all the days are merging into one. That's quite normal still at this phase. I think we need to just give ourselves time, and as you say, as doctors, we're very proactive. We want to kind of get back to normal, get things going, get things, be busy, be productive, but if we rush that, then we're not going to allow that space to heal and recover. We're going to run into much bigger problems down the line.
And that's really helpful for me, just thinking that actually this is normal. I was feeling really,
Yeah.
really low last week on a couple of days. I think probably
Yeah.
because the weather was awful as well. It doesn't help,
Yeah.
honestly. I'm a
Yeah.
very fickle soul, can be changed by the weather. But and I was on a FaceTime call with my family, and I just wasn't my normal perky self, and
Mm.
my mum, bless her, was going, right, Rachel, what's, are you okay? And I was thinking, am I not okay? Maybe I am depressed and all this. And
Yeah.
actually, I was just feeling
Yeah.
miserable
Yeah.
about what was going on and what was happening with work,
Yeah.
and the kids can't get out and see their friends. So actually,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really
I
helpful
had
just to
it,
go, what's on.
absolutely. I had it about 10 days, 2 weeks ago, and I just had a day where I just had to sit on the sofa all day and just be like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
what's going on? And I have had mental health problems and still do sometimes, and I have had bipolar disorder, as you know. And so for me, it felt very similar to when I was depressed. But I suppose the difference was that there was a slight kind of, there is a more changeableness to it. So it's not like every single day I'm completely flat. It's more that there's these moments, or like this morning I was watching something on TV, the news, and there was this lovely story, a really uplifting story about a lady who's come out of hospital after having COVID and a tracheostomy, and she's reunited with her family, including her young children. And it just really hit me, and I started crying, and I wouldn't normally, and then pre-COVID, I wouldn't normally cry at those sorts of stories. I might, but at the moment, there's just that our emotions are just that little bit closer to the surface. It can feel really disorientating, and we kind of expect it to be better already. It's okay, it should be better, but no, actually it takes time. It takes months, not weeks.
So how do we know if we are depressed and we've got a more significant mental health problem that maybe we need to seek professional help for,
Yeah.
or if it's just COVID fatigue and fed upness?
It's a really great question. And it's not easy always to tell, and it's certainly not easy to tell for ourselves. So I'm relatively experienced at knowing my own illness and pattern now, so I can just about judge it for myself, but I still run it by professionals as well. So, and what I would say is, if you're getting, say, more persistent symptoms, so you're feeling really flat and fed up and no energy and no motivation, and you're struggling with your day-to-day life, so you're struggling to get out of bed, you're struggling to eat as you normally would, you're struggling to go to work, you're struggling to do, and it's impacting day to day, but for several days, up to, like, say, a couple of weeks in a row, then I think we need to be starting to talk to a professional, seeking help, to say, your GP, or to one of the helplines that's out there, to say, is this normal, is this not? For until that point, when you're just having the odd day or the odd few days, what I'd say is just check it out with your mates and your friends and your colleagues, and just ask each other how you're doing, like your mum did with you. Just that bouncing back and forward. Like I might say to you, Rachel, oh, I've had a bad day today, or today's a better day. It kind of helps you just to get a gauge of what's everyone else going through. Is this normal? Is this not? Have they noticed something? But I suppose if what we're looking for is, for those struggling that little bit more, is that it's lasting longer, and it's really impacting on what you're able to do day to day. And there is help out there if that's you. There is absolutely, the mental health services are out there, the helplines are out there. It's all running as it would normally be there for you. So please do reach out if you're struggling.
So I just want to bring us back to this COVID fatigue, because I think there are several areas that we can get the COVID fatigue in, and I think one of them is just physical fatigue, just physically feeling knackered because maybe we're not sleeping as well. Several things, I guess, contribute to that. Anxiety and stress, and maybe waking up worrying. I found myself awake in the middle of the night just going over stuff the other night. But also maybe we're not as physically active during the day. I'm normally cycling around Cambridge and not doing that. I'm trying to get some stuff, but nowhere near as much as I used to. So I guess there's that sort of fatigue. I've read a bit about Zoom fatigue as well. Oh my goodness! So that's a thing, isn't it? Why is it that Zoom is, and these sort of virtual calls?
I don't think it's just Zoom, is it? It's handy to call it Zoom,
but other platforms exist.
Virtual working, I think, and that kind of constantly being on your screen, constantly watching yourself and others, and interacting in a human way, but with a screen between you, is exhausting. And it was really interesting this week. Myself and Claire Gerardo, the medical director NHS Practitioner Health put out a blog on the BMJ about COVID fatigue, and a big chunk of it was about, actually, this isn't just affecting those that are in hospitals or the front line where they're working directly with COVID patients. This is really affecting those that are working from home and those that are working from work but are quieter at the moment. So the fatigue's affecting us all in different ways, and you're absolutely right. Those of us working from home, we've lost those boundaries between work and home life. That's blurring more. So we're tending to be working a lot longer than we would. And when we're working, we're often distracted by, the noises, or worrying about being interrupted or things like that. And yeah, just the way of working, the having the back-to-back meetings online, constantly watching yourself on screen, as you're talking, is really exhausting mentally and physically. And it was a question, we did a webinar yesterday, and somebody asked, didn't they, is it a physical exhaustion as well? And 100%, this is mental and physical, it's both, because our bodies and our minds are just working in very different ways right now.
Yeah, there are some sort of top tips I read in an article about the Zoom fatigue, or virtual conferencing fatigue. Really good tip is, first of all, turn off your self view, because then you're not distracted by having to look at yourself thinking, is my hair okay? So what do I look like? Just because you don't normally see yourself when you're talking to someone, it's just a bit weird. So you can turn that off in many of the platforms. And the second one is, if possible, just have a phone call. And I must say, yesterday I had a couple of calls, and I actually walked while I was speaking, which is lovely. And that it's not as tiring, actually.
Yeah, and I would say as well, in between meetings, if you can, having little gaps. So I've been trying to, if I've got an hour-long meeting, I've been trying to make it 50 minutes or 55, and then taking 5 minutes and not using those 5 minutes to just check that email, or I'll just set up that other meeting, or I'll just do this, but actually standing up, moving, going elsewhere, getting outside, changing your physical energy state, so important. Yeah.
So that's the virtual working fatigue. But you also mentioned the blurred lines between work and home, and certainly I've had lots of people commenting on that. So I think before COVID came along, there was a really good TED talk that I watched. I think I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but they talk about, and I'll put the link in the show notes, it talks about the third space between work and home, and noticing that when he was coming home, he hadn't really got rid of the day's work, and he'd just go straight into his kids, and they were always, I think he realised that his kids were almost more frightened of him when he got home from work, and then he was a completely different person on a Saturday and Sunday. And he starts to talk about how you build this sort of almost like a decompression zone between your work day and your home life. Now, many people have that when they're commuting. Of course, we've lost that when we're working, those of us who are working from home. And so there are things that you can do to build that in. Maybe, going out for a walk, or going and getting changed into some actual different clothes, or doing a 10-minute meditation, or something that's going to just demark, this is work, this is home. I just need that space in between. And then what you do in that space in between is to take time to just sort of rest a bit, and then to sort of recover and reflect on what you've just done during the day, and then almost doing a ritual that helps you reset your thinking into, right, I've left that behind, I'm now into home mode. And certainly when I've not done that, I've been trying to cook tea whilst talking to a child, whilst thinking about the thing I've just done at work, and I'm really distracted, and it just doesn't feel good. Have you found yourself doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like everybody, right? We if we're not really mindful about these things from the very beginning, then we very quickly get into habits that are not so healthy. So a lot of people have been thinking, actually, it's really nice not to have to commute. I've got this extra time in my day, but we're just automatically using that to blur and keep working, basically, for most of us. I really recommend and I use a kind of technique at the end of the day, particularly, where I sort of just mentally scan through what I've done that day of work, and just kind of go, okay, so I had this meeting, and then I did this podcast, and then I did that, and then I spoke to that person, and you just kind of scan through. It's almost like you're filing away your day in your brain naturally. And then if anything pops up from it, like, oh, I forgot to do that, you just make a little note for tomorrow to do it tomorrow, and you keep going through your day until you get to the end. And it's what our brain naturally does on a commute, actually, without us realizing. But if we can actually just deliberately do that, it only takes a few minutes, and note down anything that you do tomorrow, then you can leave that at work, even if work is at home, you can leave it mentally at work, and then you walk through that door, it's like, okay, now I'm at home.
Yeah.
And it can really help to delineate that. And if you need, some people need, as you say, that a slightly bigger third space. So a time to maybe you do go for a brief walk, or you do 5 minutes on a mindfulness app, or you do do a little dance to your favorite song. It really doesn't matter what you're doing, but something just to break up, differentiate between the two. Yeah, otherwise we just carry one into the other and back again. Yeah. And that is exhausting.
Yes, there's a really good book by Michael Hyatt called Free to Focus, which I'm looking at a lot at the moment, and they do recommend that at the end of each day you set 3 priorities for the next day. So yes, as well as looking back, you think, actually, what am I doing tomorrow? You get those down, and then actually tomorrow it's much easier to get started on your work. Those of you that aren't just plowing straight into a surgery or something like that, but even then there's always other stuff that you've got to do. So sort of knowing that in advance takes it away from it's the ruminating that we do, isn't it?
Yep.
But then again,
because if we don't file that away, it stays in our brain, and like you said, you're cooking or you're trying to relax in the evening, and actually it's just, you're still switched on and it's still whizzing around, or you wake up in the middle of the night. And if that's happening to you, then get it out of your brain is my biggest tip. So write it down, have a pad and pen by your bed, preferably not a screen, but if not, if you've got your phone by your bed, then do just type it into the notes. Don't go into your social media and stuff, but just getting it out of your head, so it's not whizzing around and going, okay, I'm going to look at that in the morning.
It's interesting though, it's like you said, we do that rumination naturally on a commute and naturally when we're walking around. So sometimes it may be that you actually do need to go for a walk rather than just sitting at your desk to do that. So I talk a lot about switching your brain between focus mode and diffuse mode, and actually it's the diffuse mode where you start thinking, oh yeah, there's that thing and that thing. So there's sometimes actually getting yourself physically somewhere different to do that reflecting and planning, or be it on a walk, or you've got a cup of tea and you're going to sit in an armchair. Actually, I sometimes take myself off to that corner of my office,
I'll
and
sit in my chair.
That's my sort of planning chair where I sort of sit and I think, actually, what do I need? What's the priorities here? And that's quite helpful for me to be physically in a different space.
Yeah. So even if you've got a tiny space, if you're one of those people, I heard from a mum the other day, 3 kids downstairs, she's working 8 till 8 in her bedroom, doing like phone calls all day with patients. Even if you haven't got the space, you can just get really creative. Literally just turn your chair around. Like literally where you are, you could just literally, shift to face a different wall. Because we know that if we change our perspective, change what we're looking at, change what it shifts our brain into a different way of thinking. Like the old the movie with Robin Williams. So it's the one where he stands on the table, the Dead Poets Society, and gets his students to stand up on the teacher's desk and look at the world from a different perspective. It's really, really powerful. So even you don't need lots of space to do it. You don't need a garden. You can just do something.
So I'm sort of busy writing down these different areas of Zoom fatigue. One fatigue thing, and I'm not sure. Yes, no, we will talk about this, is people fatigue, stroke family fatigue, stroke relationship fatigue.
Totally, really important. Really,
I love
common.
my guys, and I'm so grateful for them. But you know what? We could just do with being apart for a bit, I think.
I
say that.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said it. It's happening to all of us. We're all struggling with our relationships right now because they're all shifting and changing. And I think what's happened is in the first few weeks, like I said before, we're all kind of focused in on a shared goal. We're doing what we have to do to make things work. Now it's getting a bit like it's wearing a bit thin, and we're all getting a little bit on top of each other, a bit more irritable again, and a bit more and I'm really recommending to people that they relook at their schedules and how they're managing their week, because what I think a lot of families and lots of people living together have done is kind of fallen into new patterns that they've had to cope, but some of those patterns aren't working for them. So it might be that you've divvied up the childcare, or the when you're going to do the homeschooling, or who's working when and who's doing this and who's that, and that's what you had to do to start with. But I would look at that again and go, okay, is that working for us, or do we need to change the days around or the times around a little bit, or do I need a little bit more time where it's just me? You know, we really need to start feeding that time back in, because that's the time that went completely, the first thing to go, right? We're so focused on our patients and our families and our colleagues. The first thing to go is the time for us. So if we can start to just feed that back in, and a little bit of fun, dare I say it, as well. I think now, you know, we're all still finding this quite challenging and quite tough, and it is a serious situation. But it is okay to start to build in a bit more of the joy into life again, and to think, you know, what might I enjoy? I bought myself my first ever Lego set, so it's just for me. You know, because I was playing with my son's one, and I was like, actually, I really quite like this. So I think it doesn't matter what it is, but I think just starting to mindfully look at that, how we're spending our time with each other, and can we actually just change that slightly so it works better for all of us.
I was listening to a really good podcast about relationships in COVID, and the guy was saying there's some really interesting statistics about relationships, and you know what happens and in disasters and, you know, tough times, and you know, yes, there is a lot of, you know, trauma, and a lot of people actually do end up splitting up afterwards, but actually there's a lot of relationships become stronger. And it's interesting, he was saying, you know, the problem, we forget to do the stuff that we would normally do. So, you know, if we weren't in COVID, me and my husband would make sure we tried to talk to each other more, and have a date night we try and do it every week. That never happens. Every couple of weeks, but we haven't had a date night for what we are week 7 now. The kids are always around, and it's lovely. We're always eating dinner together.
That's really helpful. And I think a lot of people, but now's the time to start thinking about that and feeding it back in again. And similar, my partner and I have a date night, and we did keep most of ours going actually, but they changed. They were very different. Like we for most of them, we just sat there like zombies, you know, like, oh my goodness, what's going on? It's too much, you know. But now is the time, I think, to start gently giving ourselves permission to just start reintroducing those sort of or normal things that keep us well and happy in the longer term. Because, you know, as human beings, we're not designed to be under constant strain and stress all the time. We need a bit of both. You know, we need to be challenged and to face up to reality and problems, but we also need downtime and connection and joy and all those lovely things. So, and I think it's about not expecting it to be the same to start with. So doing it, but not, you know, just being a bit gentle with it. Like, okay, maybe we won't be our most sparkling, amazing, you know, date night ever, but we'll do it. And then it will gradually come back to.
Are there any other areas so we talked a little bit about the physical fatigue, you know, with the not sleeping, and also the sort of maybe lack of exercise. We talked about the virtual fatigue of, you know, the effort that it takes to do relationships virtually. You know, it's not just that you're always looking at yourself, but it's more difficult to read body language in 2D, as it were.
Yeah, totally.
We talked about sort of the blurred home life fatigue, the work life blurring line fatigue, of the difficulty of work leaching into stuff, and then there's people fatigue as well.
Yeah.
Any other areas you're seeing that we are becoming a bit fatigued in?
I mean, I'm not sure there's any area of life that hasn't been touched by this. Actually, the more we go through it, the more I look around and think, I mean, there's certain things, aren't there, that have just carried on without us. Like the spring is happening here in the UK, and we're seeing the beautiful bluebells have come up, and, you know, and the sun is shining on some days, and that's lovely. And so there are bits about life in the universe that have carried on as normal, without, as if nothing's going on. But most areas, and I think it's really important you touched on that, those more subtle things that we perhaps don't think about, like the way that we interact with one another. So even if you go out to the shops, like I drove to the supermarket the other day for our food shop, everything felt different. You know, the roads looked different because there were less cars. The people were walking in different ways, and as I went into the shop, there were these new lines on the floor, and people are just sort of keeping
just
or
swerving
not
to avoid you, aren't they?
Some are wearing masks, some aren't. It's just like there's all these little subtle changes, and like different things in the shops and on the news. You know, just our television has changed. You know, it's something a lot of us do interact with on a daily basis. Our work has changed, our relationships have changed, our child rearing, everything. It's like there's very few areas where it hasn't. But what I do want to come back to is that, you know, as human beings, we're incredibly adaptable to change. That's what we do. If you think about it, as a baby, you come out of your mum's, you know, tummy, and you're actually like, everything changes from that point forward. You have to learn how to feed yourself, and learn how to walk, and learn how to talk, and how to make friends, and how to work, and how to study and have fun. And, you know, we're, as human beings, we're generally very adaptable to change. So initially it can feel a real shock, it can feel really unsettling, it can feel all over the place, and bring up a lot of difficult emotions. But actually most of us do adapt pretty quickly, and I think we're starting to see that now in this hybrid place where we're kind of 1 foot in the crisis and 1 foot into the next phase. It's like we're changing, we're adapting with it, and we're starting to feel a little bit more like, oh, okay, this is where the new boundaries are, this is how I approach this. So, you know, it is hard, but we will get through this, and we are getting through this, and we're going to get through whatever there is to come as well, and together, you know.
So Caroline, I'm going to ask you for your 3 top tips for people to avoid COVID fatigue. So while you think of those, I'll just share mine. I've just jotted a few down. My top tips for people would be, firstly, make sure you find that decompression zone, that third space between work and home. Make it something different, make it something intentional, make it a routine. So that's the first thing. I think secondly, think about how each relationship you have with the people you're with, or the people you if you're not isolating with anybody, the people you regularly see on Zoom, and think about actually, how can we make this a little bit more fun, or, you know, how can I spend a little bit more particular time with you? And then I think my third tip would be, don't forget that recovery time in the middle of the response and the rebuilding. Don't jump straight into rebuilding and action. Actually make sure you just sit with yourself and think about actually what you need right now, and don't be afraid to take it easy and give yourself a bit of a break. Those are my 3. Caroline, what do you have?
Really great tips. I think we're not going to avoid COVID fatigue. I think we're all going to feel it. We're either feeling it now, or we're going to feel it going forwards. I think that's natural and normal when something like this happens. I think for me, this phase is about pacing and taking a break. So even if you've got work to do, even if you've got that long to-do list of things to do at home, allowing yourself to take time out from that and getting used to having time off again. I think that's, you know, we need to get reacquainted with taking time off and taking breaks, and that includes taking some leave. I think it's really, really important, you know, because this is for the long haul. This is going to go on for months and years. We need to be taking regular time out and leave. I think the other thing I would recommend is perhaps building in some sort of review process for your day. So something at the end of your particular working day where you just take a few moments. As the NHS Practitioner Health and I developed a little poster recently that's a 3-minute ritual. You take 3 deep breaths and you ask yourself 3 questions. What was hard? What went well? And what do I need right now? So just something simple like that can just really help just to contain and process what you're going through day to day as we go through this phase. Just being gentle with ourselves and just thinking, what do we need right now? And whatever that is, it's okay. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. That's really helpful. Good. So, you know, for all our listeners, we hope that, you know, you're doing okay, and just recognise that COVID fatigue is normal and we're all experiencing it. But just keep an eye on yourself, an eye on your colleagues, an eye on your friends and family, and get help if you need it. So, you know, make sure they're all the links are going to be in the bottom of the show notes there. So Caroline, thank you once again for doing the podcast with me. We'll be back. We'll be back talking about whatever we think is the new thing in a couple of weeks' time, because like we said, things are changing all the time. As ever, if you want to contact us, please get in touch with us. We'll leave our email addresses. You can get in touch with us via email, via Twitter. We're on LinkedIn. Share your thoughts, and if there's anything you would like us to cover in any of these podcasts, please let us know. Do submit your questions questions, and maybe we could do a Q&A one quite soon coming up, Caroline. That might
Yeah,
be
I think it'd be lovely. Let's do a webinar or something where we can get some interaction and some
yeah.
answer people's questions. Yeah, let's do that.
So watch this space, but please contact us, and please share this with people you think it might be useful for. So thank you. See you
Thank
soon.
you. Bye.
Bye.